good. You want some water?
Yes. So, Home Queer Home is a very ambitious art project which has many different elements to it. It brings together different artistic genres and formats to kind of try to achieve a very big event. Those formats are live art performance, community engagement, documentary, and video and sound installation. This project takes place at Horsens prison, which is a former prison and is now a historical museum and a space where they also do different events. This place was proposed by the leader of the festival, and as soon as I heard it, I was like, I'm all in. This is the perfect setting for this project. It kind of informed my decision making on investigating a project for young queer people around topics of freedom, home, and belonging, and what that means for young queer people today.
I have to say that the metaphor for having queer art in prison is amazing by itself, because I actually expect the building to be frightening. I expect the building to evoke the feeling that yes, this is how we felt all the time, when we just had to be as under the shackles, like we could not be ourselves at all.
So there are three different major artistic elements that are happening in the prison space. And the first one being, on one side of the space, there is a 7-screen video installation. And on those screens, the 50 interviews that we have conducted with young queer individuals from all across Denmark is presented. Then on the other side of the room, there is a giant mirror with a huge rainbow backdrop, which becomes basically a stage where up to 100 participants become live performers on the event. And then the final element is a series of photographs, of portraits that we have taken of all the people that have been part of the interviews.
My expectation was to be a part of this cool project. I've always wanted to do more theater, artsy kind of stuff, and I also hope that it would bring me closer to other queer people.
Well, I hope it's gonna bring more light and acceptance to LGBTQ+ people. I think we are kind of a stigmatized crowd still, even here in Denmark. So I love projects like this, where we bring more light and understanding and kind of educating the public a little bit about us. So, because we are regular people. Yeah.
I think it's amazing that you gather so many queer people at one place and actually have a way of telling people's stories and a way for people to gain an experience from it.
To inspire other people, to talk from my experience, and also to move on.
So I feel like some people who maybe aren't in the queer community and haven't really experienced this for themselves can maybe get a little bit of a wake-up call from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a little bit of a sweet story to be like, oh, okay, queer people are humans.
In order to realize such an ambitious project like Home Queer Home, team has been incredibly important. So basically, I've gathered together a working team that is family to me, and people that I feel belonging with, who I know that we can go through a rough time together and get the shit done. So those people are Tone, who is in charge of recruitment and an artistic collaborator. Aris, who is sat behind this camera now interviewing me, who is also a performer and artistic collaborator and is in charge of this little behind the scene footage. And then we have Christopher, who is videographer, who I've collaborated with for many, many years. and Jeppe, who's the scenographer and technical manager, who I've also collaborated with. And then there is Sina, who is our producer and the person behind the scenes that's getting all the like practical things going. So yes, as I said, massive, ambitious project, takes a lot of hands, a lot of collaboration in order to realize it.
Okay, we started the recruitment process with first reaching out to a lot of different organizations that we thought may help to some extent find people. And in that we asked them to share in their network our open call. 2 months in, we had like two that have signed up. So then I just started writing out to hundreds of people, assuming that they were in the age group and that they identify as queer. And then from that, people started to respond, and these conversations could begin. The first message was very brief. I linked to some information about the project, and then from there, if they would want to have a conversation with me. And then we would call, and I'll talk about the project and hear a little bit about them, making these individual agreements of how to be in contact with each other. Then when we ended up having to start to plan the interview, Sina and I collaborated, Sina the producer on the project, about first making this sign-up sheet. Where do you live, where are you based, so on, so we know where and when do you have time to go and have this interview.
Well, a lot of footwork for every single participant. Had to first of all get their information about where they live. I sent out a questionnaire with where they lived and which days and times they were able to do an interview. And then I put in everybody on a Google map to see where they live around in Denmark. And whoever lived in the same area, I tried to find a day where all were possible to interview. It didn't always work out that way. I know there have been some times where the interview team have driven a long way for just one interview. Relating to Jøk, this older queer identity, because it also has a massive impact on them. And they have like a specific anecdote I'm probably going to lead them into talking about.
Yeah, that's good.
And it was kind of a transphobic poster that they painted over, and then Jøk being extremely supportive of this action. And then after that, Andreas and I started, and Aris, started to create these questions that we will send out. Those questions were meant as a provocation to start a conversation between me and the person, and also kind of create a trust and an intimacy that this is a room where you can share on it and interview on it. It was really fantastic. It's also trying to make them relatively broad, so each individual had its possibility to kind of shine out from that. Yeah. But still, of course, that we have a certain wish to reach some different topics. It was kind of amazing how vulnerable and open people were from the get-go, really willing to share and just being super transparent and articulated. It was very beautiful. And in there, I would potentially have ideas to what the statement should be about, that we reach many different aspects of what it will mean to be a queer young individual today. But that was actually not very difficult. There were some similarities within it, but diversity within the sharings was enormous. And then I had those conversations in cars and in forests and in gas stations and everywhere.
So it was a lot of also people to take in and stories to hold. There were many different reasons why people also couldn't join, and also people falling out of the project because of the mental issues and life, and there is many stories, and it's all people with so much baggage. So of course that has also reflected during the process, where it can even happen on the day. So in that we have to be super flexible and also like keep holding a space with a lot of care, because of course some things can be inconvenient, but then again it's just reflecting also that people are going through a lot.
Yes, it's here. Rooftop 11.
Hello.
11th floor.
Dang.
Then around only.
So I'm filming, and you're welcome. And I'll cue you when we reach about 30 seconds. Everybody ready? And you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. And you're welcome. And you're welcome. You're welcome. And you're welcome. You're welcome. Are du klar?
Nej.
You're welcome. And you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. And you're welcome. You're welcome. And you're welcome. And you're welcome. So for every person we came out to for filming, we had a set procedure. Everything had to be very planned, and we have a very restricted post-production period. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Super. As soon as we landed, I would start setting up together with Aris and Tone and Andreas, setting up sound equipment, where we did a surround recording of the location. And at the same time, I'm moving about and I'm putting up my camera, changing lens, setting up a separate microphone for the camera, and we're capturing all this in the surround recording. The idea with this is to use, which you will see in the installation, is to use this kind of naked audio portrait of the process, where you both hear the person speaking in a more informal setting, but still talking about very serious things. And you also hear us doing our mundane tasks, and this whole mix between everyday setting, but obviously not very everyday. So it gives it a kind of a naked kind of aspect. Every single interviewee would get a photograph, still picture. So I would snap this while Tone is talking to the person, and then quickly change over to the first camera up on the tripod and the first statement, which every single interviewee would have prepared a personal statement based on their own experience and their own thoughts and ideas. I wanted to have a look that was classical in a way, not super classical. They're not set off on an angle. They're like squarely facing, like social media facing the camera. But the lens, I wanted it to be respectful, have a respectful distance. So we shot on a relatively long lens, but not crazy long, because I didn't want it to be like a very flat portrait. I wanted to have a sense of space and depth. We didn't want people to get the feeling that this is something to be hidden from the world, or I want to stay anonymous, or we wanted the exact opposite. It is intimate and respectful, but it's open, presenting it freely to the world. When I was looking for these close-ups, I wasn't looking to hide them. I was looking to find, for example, spaces of their body that reflected what they were saying, that reflected a sense, perhaps at the moment they were saying something sensitive. So I would look for that. And these close-ups are part of the introduction to each person. And then, of course, we would come to the statement, the main statement, which they prepare. You're asking people to open up completely. So you prepare everything around, and even the post-production is pre-prepared. There's nothing by chance, except everything it's not by chance, but you have no control over the content. So for me, like from an artistic point of view, shaping the context around to allow that freedom, but also being sure that when we come home and have to put this into a piece, it's going to work. And that's a big, interesting challenge, also a big challenge. Yeah. Because it has to work, it has to, because otherwise you're also doing a disrespect towards the people. And of course, meeting all the people and the diversity of experiences, and also being confronted with yourself in what was shared, you know, and kind of digesting that.
So far, we have interviewed 50 queer identities from all across Denmark in the space of 4 weeks. It's been quite a tremendous journey, a lot of driving between cities, villages, towns, and a lot of amazing experiences of entering into strangers' homes and documenting where they live, meeting, finding out who they are and what their experiences are and why they wanted to be in this project. It's been quite tremendous, quite big, and extremely eye-opening.
I've been following around the process of interviewing 50 young queer individuals, and we have been traveling around Denmark, and my role was to film footage for the behind-the-scenes documentation of the project. Also help facilitate the interviews. Now I'm making the documentary, so I'm editing all of this footage, linking bits together, interviewing the members of the team, and yeah, and when this is done, we're going to be very busy in finding how to make the performance.
The performance for Home Queer Home is a live art happening that basically recruits up to 100 queer identities from all across Denmark, and on the day of the show everybody comes together to learn actions of standing together, being seen together, taking space together, laughing together, shouting together, basically being present together under a humongous mirror, and in this idea basically be mirrored in each other and in front of a public.
The mirror itself is created from something that's called aluminium sandwich plates with a foam, very lightweight foam in between, and then another aluminium, and then the foil, the mirror foil itself. So it's a lightweight mirror that cannot break and go into pieces.
When it's up there, it's not that complicated to hold it by the feet. Yeah. But if you let go of it, it might come down. Smash!
So even though it looks really heavy, it's actually not that heavy compared to the size of it.
So how has it been working on Home Queer Home, Tony?
I've been working on Home Queer Home.
Yeah.
Well, it's been quite a mirroring experience.
So then we took the distance from the back wall and from the ground up to that, and we saw that the mirror can rig perfectly fine.
With no problem.
With
Yeah.
no problem.
Okay.
But that's the beauty of this kind of thing. It can make you avoid getting surprised in negative way when we are down there. These stands here, they are all speakers hidden inside, and I constructed them out of wood. And these days I'm wrapping them in black molten of a light quality so sound can pass through. And then inside them is the speakers. One thing that we made us invent this was we wanted the speakers to be in pillars, and we don't think 10 speakers is particularly pretty. So we wanted it to be hidden somehow, and in order for us not to have cables on the ground between all of them. And then first we have them standing on a totally flat line, and it doesn't then they don't pop in the sense that then they just becomes one part of the building, because the building is also flat.
Yeah.
So we thought by twisting them a little bit, we are queering up the space.
Yeah.
The sound on the speakers,
Yeah.
it's taking so much time to craft it in relation to what's going on. So it's like we're spending a lot of time crafting sound with the videos, and it's just taking too long. And so basically, the way that you're suggesting, the dilemma that we're having is the volume of the spoken texts in relation to what is played. Because the easiest way the whole thing would function is if all the interviews, all of the documented interviews, we put them in Mad Mapper, bum, 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 they all play out one after the other, but there is a sound, a completely independent sound score that just works, that we don't have to craft it to work.
The idea is that when you are walking around in the space, which is quite huge, it's 12 meters from this side to this side over here. It's 12 meters long, so it's essentially the whole square here where you're going to experience the surround soundscape is 12 by 12 roughly.
And what other samples of sounds do we have?
We have a great composer called Malou from Holland that we've worked with before, who created some different tracks that we have been experimenting with using in this setting, which is very nice, because then we have the raw material of the voices on separate tracks, so that we can make one person, a virtual person, standing there singing with one voice and another, so we essentially have like a 10 choir of her own voice.
But basically on the back side of this, where the speakers are, it's where we think about how can the sound from documentary be separated from documentary and become its own installation. So, but you can, not this, but the speakers.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's like, okay, so if this is like, this is all talking, it's all text, and then this whole space is all sound. So here we work with atmospheric sounds, we work with the sounds of an orchestra tuning up, and very, very simple sounds that create a sense of openness and a sense of space, and not too much emotive implementation, or like, you know, to make people feel emotion. And basically looking at, because it's a big space, how do we pull people into the documentary? So like if you're watching it on TV, all the sound is coming from one place. Whereas here we have the opportunity to work with volume of texts from here that's spread out through the space, and then this portion of the room like an undertone of sound, and then the light, the energy of the performers.
I think it's extremely important, first of all, because it's mapping what is the landscape of young queer youth in Denmark today, and it's a fragment of it, but in my experience over this time with Home Queer Home, it was an eye-opener, because there's people who have very strong statements to make and then you get to see that things are changing. They are ahead and they're fighting for things that in past years wouldn't be there. And also I was very extremely and in a good way surprised by how eloquent their language was and how articulate they were and how they could express at such a very young age things that are topics and very personal material that is very delicate, and they did that beautifully and it was very, very touching. And yeah, I think we all feel attached to those stories, and the fact that they found a way of sharing that and maybe get some sort of that weight lifted.
This is just the beginning. This Home Queer Home is just the first step in what I hope to be a very long process. So I always knew that this would be a get-go, and I have this big ambition to do Home Queer Home Nordic. So basically to start mapping out young queer voices from all the different Nordic regions, and not necessarily major cities, but smaller kind of towns and villages, and kind of get out there and see and hear what is it like to grow up queer in the Nordic regions today. As well as this, another stage which has become very apparent to me and very important is to make Home Queer Home Bridging the Gap, which will take place I want it to take place in Denmark, which is a project where I would recruit hopefully 10 senior queer identities and 10 queer youth, and facilitate conversations about history, conversations about where we see each other, where do queer youth see queer elders, do queer elders pass down any history or knowledge to queer youth, and kind of facilitate this type of conversations, and from those conversations create a kind of artistic work. So yes, it's a massive project with the I view it as a social empowerment / art / performance project that kind of queers the lines between all of it. And definitely over 5 to 6 years span.
Frihed betyder for mig mulighed for at vælge.
Frihed for mig betyder, at du kan være, hvem du har lyst til, uden at nogen skal kommentere.
Frihed betyder for mig, når jeg kan grine og jeg kan grave, uden at lægge låg på mig selv.
Frihed for mig betyder at kunne eksistere uden undskyldninger, uden forklaring, og altså bare eksistere som mig.